Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel McAdams is with me today. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Yesterday, there was a speech out at the Reagan Library by somebody with a famous name, and I hope he doesn't become another president. And that, of course, is Jeb Bush. He gave a major speech on foreign policy to straighten out all his mixed up statements so far. You know, is he with his brother and with his dad, or isn't he? Which way is he going to go? Is he going to get some new advisors? But CNN covered this, and the title of the article they wrote was Jeb Bush blames Clinton, Obama for Iraq's problem. So it looks like he's home free. He doesn't have to worry about criticizing his brother or his dad for, you know, getting us involved in this mess. And he blames, the Democrats. That's what politicians do. They look to blaming other parties. But he also blamed the Russians. The Russians are bad people and they're causing trouble, and it has nothing to do with NATO or the Europeans stirring up trouble in the Ukraine. And also Iran. I mean, the neocons have to always throw that in. And they're the source of all the problems. It's a mess, and ISIS is out of control. And he has the solution, and all of a sudden he found his way, and he has beliefs, and I would assume that you probably will agree that his answers are not too much leaning toward peace, but it looks like to more war. What about his advisors? What kind of advisors does he have? Does he have the same old group, or is he going to get some new libertarian advisors on foreign policy?
My phone is not ringing. I don't believe yours has either. But, you know, the Washington Post had a graphic that we'll have up in a second. And this was earlier in the year, and it's been, I'm sure, modified to a degree. But what I think is powerful about this is that shows that he's drawn from the most neoconservative advisors, from Reagan on down to his brother, Reagan, Bush, and Bush. And so you have Paul Wolfowitz, you have Otto Reich, you have all of these people that urged war, that urged going into Iraq, that talked about cakewalks and things. These are the same people that are advising him, and I think he is essentially a pretty blank slate. He probably doesn't have a lot of foreign policy experience, so he's all ears, and the things they've told him don't comport with reality, but that's the neocon specialty. Make up your own reality as you go.
Well, he must be looking at our report every single day, and the advisors know what we're saying, because they were very accurate in condemning everything we've suggested, and they're saying we have to do this, like the no-fly zone, and put in more troops, spend more money. And of course, the Democrats has allowed the military to collapse. They have to rebuild the military. And just think of what we've been spending, you know, on useless weapons and all these things. But same old cliches. And of course, the world is a dangerous place, and ISIS is the danger. So therefore, you know, they do things for political reasons, so they're making the assumption that this is a good political ploy. Yeah. And one of the traps I think they're falling into, I hope it's a trap and that the American people aren't this gung-ho, and it has to do with Trump. You know, Trump says same thing, ISIS bad people. Of course, we know they're bad people, but you have to understand the system. And Trump said, send in the troops, ground troops and everything else. So almost like now it's going to be more comfortable, and all of a sudden, Jeb comes forth and says, yeah, we can say that. Instead of maybe challenging Trump, he joins in the hawkish answer to all these problems.
Well, it's such an illogical fallacy if you think about it. Al-Qaeda and ISIS were allowed to thrive because of the U.S. intervention in Iraq. So how does it logically follow that by having more intervention, you'll have less of what the intervention caused in the first place? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, what about the shortcomings of the argument that it was Obama and Clinton, and what was the responsibility on the Bushes? And first, they got us involved, and they did a few other things that really compounded this problem.
Well, one of the things that Bush said that Jeb Bush said, which was such revisionist history, is that it's all Obama's fault because he pulled the troops out of Iraq. We should have stayed there permanently and things would have been just peachy keen. But that is absolutely untrue. You know, it was his brother who was attempting to negotiate a status of forces agreement with the Iraqi leadership, and he had demanded that the U.S. troops who stayed remain immune from any prosecution for any violations, and we know that there were many, many of them, for any violations of Iraqi law for torturing and harassing citizens. The Iraqis resisted giving them further immunity, and the U.S. said, without that immunity, we won't stay. And that's where it ended, And that's why the troops had to go, because the U.S. wouldn't back down and the Iraqis wouldn't back down.
Now, not only is Obama responsible, he claims, and Clinton, and of course they're responsible for a lot of bad stuff, but to throw in Russia and say Russia is at fault and the Iranians are at fault, you know, that's a pretty far stretch. So I cannot see any new things, because he, in this speech, and Jeb even threw in, you know, maybe this is for us. He says, and we have to continue with our diplomatic effort to promote a stable government in the region.
Yeah, but his idea of diplomacy is you come in there and you tell people what to do, and they better do it or get bombed.
And if they do, maybe that's their stability.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the old Soviet system. We will have peace on our terms. We're all for peace on our terms. Yeah, we're for stability on our terms, as long as you do what we tell you to do. But you know, there was another thing in his speech that caught my attention, and it should catch your attention of everything, because this has come up in the debates, and Rand has certainly mentioned that, and that is our privacy issue. And in here, Bush is saying, crack down on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and find out, because they're the ones who are recruiting ISIS following. You know, over here in the United States, how many do they get? There are a few nuts that are involved in this, but is it the freedom of individuals to use Facebook and Twitter? Are they at fault and we have to crack down on them? It's a far stretch. I think that's probably one of the most dangerous statements made. We all know about the danger of militarism, but this is militarism against the American people. And they pretend that ISIS is the enemy, and I claim the American government is our enemy when it comes to the destruction of our liberties.
It shows his authoritarian impulses are there. You know, the other thing that struck me about Jeb's speech, and it struck me that essentially he's clueless. He doesn't know what's going on in the world. He doesn't understand these things. He's listening to people that lied to him just like they lied to his brother. But he says something like this, which you and I that look at this and people that look at this every day know it's absurd. He said, defeating ISIS requires defeating Assad. Which, however we feel about Assad, we know that Assad is fighting ISIS. ISIS is a huge threat to Assad's government. You know, they're making their way toward Damascus. And here's his solution: I'm going to draw the moderates back together as one force. There are no moderates. Even this program that we talked about, that's training these rebels to go in, that they've only gotten 60. There was an article in the Daily Beast the other day. They've abandoned that essentially because it's a farce. And now they're relying heavily on the Kurds to be our boots on the ground, except that our allies, the Turks, are bombing the Kurds.
Yeah, this is the whole thing. The Iranians would be willing to fight ISIS, and the Kurds are doing a good job. At the same time now, they're our arch enemies. It makes no sense. I think the best medical term for this is they're totally schizophrenic on the way they do things. It makes no sense whatsoever. But I hope that Jeb is not successful in this, that he can distance himself from the two other Bushes and claim that he can out-Bush them, and the American people say, oh yeah, the other thing. I think the American people finally got tired of the war. That's why 2008 was so bad, and why it continues, and I think the sentiment is still, you know, against troops. But an incident alone can be a motivator to change the American people's opinion. All of a sudden, you know, some Americans get killed, and there will be an incident, and the American people will say, yes, you know, they use the beheadings, you know, as the motivator, which is a horror, but they don't talk about the beheadings of our ally in Saudi Arabia and how they've been involved in this as well.
And he also wants to send in troops. We didn't mention that. He wants to embed the Marines and Special Forces inside Syria. But he says, don't worry, it's going to be easy. It's not really a big commitment. Doesn't it remind you of the cakewalk? This will be a cakewalk in Iraq.
Well, he wants to do the same thing in Iraq. The policy is the same. I am obviously a non-interventionist. Everybody knows that. But I like to draw a straight line, because I think it's sort of like, I am against welfare, except a little bit, because we have to bail out the banks when they need it. So incrementalism and give up the principle. Once you decide you're an interventionist, that you get involved in entangling alliances and sign these treaties, and you send our troops and you go to war without declaration, there's no end to it. And that's where we are. And the interventionists, all they do is they vary things a little bit. And he's trying to rewrite history and redo this and take the same policy that has been a total failure and routed the Republicans in 2008. This is why we have Obama. If he doesn't like Obama's foreign policy, well, why did we have the Bush foreign policy? Because that was one of the biggest issues in 2008.
Well, you think with everyone struggling to, with not everyone, but most of the candidates struggling to outdo each other on hawkishness, someone could come forth and make the case for peace. People might think, hey, that's refreshing.
Yeah, remember what Jeb has said here is that when they asked him the question, would he go in? He said that they had bad intelligence. You know, if we didn't have this intelligence. Why don't you refresh the audience viewpoint on the intelligence that you and I were able to achieve when they were working up for the first, you know, the war in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Well, it's also, you start from a reflexive beginning. You know, they're reflexively pro-interventionist. They need to be convinced not to. You have been reflexively non-interventionist. There has to be a doggone good reason. But as far as intelligence, we had very little. We were reading what Scott Ritter was saying. And
had them in our offices, some of these guys.
And very few others. We had some of the people who had actually resigned from the Bush administration came to talk to us. But we had very little intelligence, but we had a skepticism.
And we also had some CIA agents that had worked on this. They fortified it, but like you said, my position is non-intervention, and it was not a threat to our national security, and there was no justification morally or for international security, any of this. And of course, the evidence is so clear that it did exactly the opposite. It bankrupting our country, spent trillions of dollars, and introduced ISIS and Al-Qaeda to the whole region, and nothing but chaos, and we're not winning this argument. I mean, I think we're not too good if we can't convince the people. So, but I have to say that our opposition is pretty powerful. You know, there's a lot of money against us. You know, we have a little video here that goes out, and a few people watch it, but they have a lot more access when you think of the banking system and the military-industrial complex and all the media. They're all, you know, whether it's who's the most hawkish, CNN, MSNBC, or Fox.
Yeah.
It just happens that they're all supporting this nonsense. All they bicker over is who gets to carry the box around and control the power, and that's what they fight about in the elections, you know, and not have a real alternative to the mess that we have right now. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. This, of course, is a very vital issue coming up in the next year. We're going to hear a lot about it. But I hope the American people stay alert and not accept some of this nonsense on foreign policy. It reminds me of the statement that I've used before that Ronald Reagan used when he admitted he made a severe mistake when he sent the Marines into Beirut, and 241 of them were killed. And he eventually came back in his memoirs and said, "I made a mistake." He says, "I didn't realize how irrational the politics of that region was. He shouldn't have sent him in, and if he had listened to non-intervention and neutrality," he said, "those Marines would still be alive today." Why don't they quote Reagan on this when he woke up and said that he made a serious mistake? But we continue wholesale. And then we have Jeb Bush going to the Reagan Library and bragging that Ronald Reagan would support all this because he'd equate this to communism. Well, I think what we ought to look at is President Reagan's statement in his memoirs on why he changed his mind, and his strong advice was he should have never gone in there. That is amazing that he was so self-critical. And I think that the American people have a right to know that and to realize that the option is not just more war and more militarism. And don't buy into this stuff that we have to rebuild the military. I mean, we have more weapons than everybody else put together, and building up this fear that we're about to be invaded and ISIS is under our beds. I think that we need to wake up and win this argument that a little bit of common sense, a little bit of constitutionality, a little bit of morality, and a few people who would stand up for what is right when it comes to foreign policy, we'd all be a lot better off. Thank you very much for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.